Welcome. It's now time for Ask the Governor, your chance to talk with the 56th Governor of Louisiana, John Bel Edwards. Over the next hour, the Governor will take your questions. The phone number into the Louisiana Radio Network studios is 1-877-217-5757. It's Ask the Governor. And now, here's your moderator, Jim Engster.
Thank you, Kevin Gallagher, and welcome aboard for the 89th edition of Ask the Governor. Governor John Bel Edwards hasn't missed a program since the show began in April of 2016. He is now winding down in his second term. In fact, the election to succeed him is now 8 weeks from Saturday. We'll talk a bit about qualifying and the governor's soon departure from an office that he has held for 2 terms. And again, your number is 877-217-5757. The governor, as he came in today, had a bit of a spring in his step, and it may have been because it's about 3 degrees cooler, but football is in the offing, and he's a huge Louisiana State University partisan, and the Tigers open at Orlando against Florida State, a matchup of 2 top 10 teams. Governor, I suspect you'll be there?
I will be there. I intend to be at that game, and the day before, I will be in Monroe because ULM will host Army. I was on ULM's campus yesterday and speaking to the Chamber of Commerce, about 500 people. It was a great crowd. But to be on a college campus this time of year, when students are coming back and you know, everybody's looking forward to football. You know, there's a lot of excitement in the air, and I'm excited about it as well. Looking forward to a great season for all the teams around the state. Of course, as you mentioned, I'm a graduate of LSU, the law school in particular, and count myself just a fanatic for LSU, not just a fan. So, yeah, I'm excited about going to Orlando, and I think, I was telling you this before the show started, it may be the marquee matchup for the first week. I mean, this is, I think, number 5 against number 8. I don't know that there's another game involving 2 teams that are ranked as high as that. So it should be great, especially if we can win and sort of avenge that loss that we suffered last year in the Superdome.
Yeah, 1 point at the Superdome a year ago, missed extra point, would have sent it into overtime if it had been successful. But I recall when I was a little kid, John McKithen, when LSU lost its opener to Texas A&M in 1970, he punched out a window in a state car. I don't think you'll be doing that no matter what the outcome is.
I don't do that, though. But I'm a pretty big fan. Donna will sometimes tell me I need to calm down just a bit.
Well, the Tigers are expected to be good, and as we know, football it's probably as big as politics in Louisiana, and we've got an election in 8 weeks, and qualifying took place last week. Now, with a departure in the insurance commissioner's race, Tim Temple has won a statewide office without ever being elected, without an opponent. And Mike Strain has won a 5th term as agriculture commissioner. Here in the Baton Rouge area, 11 legislative seats are decided because there were no opponents signing up to run against incumbents. What do you make of this, the fact that this year the ballot is a bit sparse compared to other years?
Well, it is. And first of all, I've had an opportunity already to congratulate Commissioner Strain. I do want to congratulate Tim Temple, now somebody that I know quite well, and he is a serious person and well qualified for the job. And I really think he will do a good job in the whole insurance situation in the Gulf Coast, but here in Louisiana, particularly challenging. So I appreciate him stepping up. You know, in terms of the legislature, I think it's a number of things, but one of which is $16,800. That's been the salary now since the late 70s. It hasn't changed, and it gets harder and harder every election cycle to get people interested, especially if they still have jobs and commitments at home and so forth. The idea that they would spend that much time for such little compensation makes it a little bit harder for people to decide to run. But there are a number of races that are contested, and you know, the governor's race, you mentioned that. I think one of the surprises was that there wasn't a surprise. There really wasn't a marquee name that jumped in the race at the end, and there wasn't a marquee name who had been campaigning who decided not to qualify. And so that's sort of unusual. at the end of the day. But we have 8 weeks, and people typically start paying attention to these races around Labor Day. That's coming up. And so the candidates will have several more weeks to make their pitch to the voters, and we'll see what happens on October the 14th.
It is rare that a member of Congress does not run for governor. It's an open shot. Person gets to keep their congressional seat even if they lose, whether it's senator or U.S. House. And I remember in 1987, we had 3 congressmen run in Tozan, Romer, and Livingston. And it was thought that one of the congressmen or the congresswoman would pull the trigger, but none did. And the Republican field is such that Jeff Landry started as the front runner, and he remains so until further notice. How do you view, I know you're for Sean Wilson, and he has the Democratic side pretty much open to himself, but how do you view what's happened on the Republican side this year?
I don't go to their meetings, and so I'm not exactly sure how all of that plays out. I am for Sean Wilson. I think he's immensely qualified and just a wonderful person, and comes from a great family. He and Rocky and their 2 children, Denise and Sean. Janice and Josh. But in any event, on the Republican side, you obviously have a number of people who are very interested in the job and serious candidates in their own right, a state representative, a senator, a treasurer, former executive director of Louisiana Association of Business and Industry, for example. We do not have a congressperson, which is a little bit unusual. But as you were talking about that, I was trying to think, who was the last person who won running for governor while they were in Congress?
Yeah,
that's right.
Not so long ago.
No, it wasn't that long ago. But that may have something to do with it. I'm not sure.
Well, but Jindal, Romer, Treen, Edwards, the other one, they all came from the U.S. House of Representatives to the governorship, and no attorney general, I believe, has ever been elected governor. And now we have a guy who he started as the front runner, and he remains so. We always enjoy your insights and questions for Governor John Bel Edwards, show number 89. Jerry Mayer is here. First time in 89 shows. He's been a little tardy, but he was covering the Public Service Commission meeting today. And, of course, that's one of the important entities in Louisiana. That one has a 3-2 majority Republicans over Democrats, which is kind of symbolic of the electorate right now. And we'll get to a question that a listener asked offline about gerrymandering. But what about the governor's election? And I know you don't want to turn it over to a Republican, but we've had a succession of every governor since Romer has turned it over to a person of the opposite party.
That is correct. And in fact, every morning I'm reminded of that, because when I walk down the stairs at the governor's mansion, there are photographs of all of the governors. And at the top of the stairwell is Edwin. Now, McKithen and Davis are there as well, but they've been pushed around the side because of the number of photographs. And if you start with Edwin Edwards on the way down, you go Edwin Treen, Edwin Romer, and Edwin Foster, Kathleen, Bobby, and then me. And so it literally is, even though Romer was elected as a Democrat, he
was defeated as a Republican. Yeah.
Correct, and changed to Republican while he was in office. And so if you go back to 1972, that has been the pattern. Now, as you mentioned, I'm for Sean Wilson. At the end of the day, my goal is to leave the state in the best possible shape for my successor in a number of very important and substantial ways. I'm quite confident we're going to be able to do that. And while it is my preference, certainly, that Sean Wilson be the person taking the oath of office on January the 8th, my commitment to the people of Louisiana is whoever that is. We're going to have a good transition. I'm going to support the next governor, and I want him or her to be immensely successful, because I'm not moving out of state. I'm going to be a Louisianan, and I want things to continue to improve. But I also want a number of our initiatives to be kept in place. And I'm heartened and gratified, for example, to know that I believe what I'm saying is accurate. All of the major candidates for governor have said the ITEP changes will stay, and the Medicaid expansion, for example, will stay. Well, those are two of the biggest things that I've done as governor, and when I did them, were criticized a lot on the other side. But I think the wisdom of those changes has really been proven by the results that we've achieved.
Well, a listener offline did ask about gerrymandering, and when you were talking about the low pay for state lawmakers, and I'm sure that is a contributing factor, but in many of these districts now, the only way a person is going to be defeated is by somebody from their own party. Mm-hmm. And if an incumbent is relatively popular, people say, well, I'm not going to run against that person because I largely agree with them and they're well financed and well ensconced. Mm-hmm. Does gerrymandering create a problem along those lines?
Well, I mean, I think it does, and I certainly didn't mean to say that the pay, having not increased since the late 70s, I think it was, is the only reason. I do think it is a significant reason for that. But I think the creation of a lot of really safe districts and how that gets refined every redistricting period, and it's not helpful. I don't believe, because we want a variety of people with different ideas running, so voters have a real choice. We really want a system where the voters choose who their representatives are, rather than representatives choosing who their voters are. Because when that happens, this is sort of how it plays out. So I do think there is some validity to that, and I think there's other ills associated with that, especially at the congressional level, because you end up with very few competitive districts, and you have people who are elected, and they only have to play to their base voters, and they never have to try to compromise. Well, that may be a good way to get elected. It is a horrible way to govern, and I think that that's been proven many times over. When Congress is unable to do the most essential blocking and tackling that they have to do, whether it's passing a budget and providing for the defense and so forth. I mean, there's just nothing easy and routine in Congress anymore.
Again, 877-217-5757. We will go to the phone lines in short order with Governor John Bel Edwards, the 56th governor, doing his 89th Ask the Governor show. And the election is 8 weeks away, first time in a long time that you're not on a ballot. You've been doing this since 2007. Do you have any withdrawal symptoms?
I'm not going to say I have withdrawal symptoms. I love public service. I've enjoyed my time as a state representative. I've really enjoyed my time as governor. It has been challenging at times, as you know, and difficult at times, but it's been very gratifying. It's obviously just been a tremendous honor and privilege to serve. I don't mind not running, but I'm quite certain that when I'm no longer serving, that will sort of be bittersweet for me, because I'm excited about what comes next, but at the same time, I really do love the job that I have every single day.
And our Constitution is such that after you sit out a term, you could run any time from now on. You could run next time, or 3 or 4 times. You're young enough. You're 56, where today in political circles, that's a baby. John Kennedy's in the U.S. Senate. He's about to be 72. Bill Cassidy's of 69 in a few days. So any thoughts about a comeback at some point?
The Constitution would allow it. The First Lady would not. So, and I don't say never. That is not my intention right now. I fully intend to go back to the private sector, to go home. And I would quite frankly be surprised if I ever decide to go back into public service or seek elective office.
Well, what was that film that Sean Connery made when he came back as James Bond? Never Say Never Again.
That's right.
Sometimes things happen, and of course, I think a lot would depend upon the direction of the state and whether you were in sync with what was going on, and we don't know yet. And my guess is that you love this state. No matter who's elected, you'll be supportive of what happens.
I hope to be extremely supportive and to be like every other Louisianan, well served, and with someone who's going to continue to make critical investments, whether it's in education or healthcare or transportation, continue policies that expand opportunity and those sorts of things. And look, I am mindful that we still have challenges, but there are so many critical ways that are just we're demonstrably better off. We have a balanced budget. We are investing again in education at the best levels ever. I'm going to leave right at $3 billion in our savings accounts. You heard me right at $3 billion. There was a total of 400 million when I became governor, with a $2 billion deficit.
So that's a $1.6 billion
In fact,
shortfall.
we close out last fiscal year this week. All the final accounting will be done, and then some of these numbers in terms of the surplus from last year and so forth, and what's in the savings accounts, that's going to be more precise. But I have enough information to know that we've moved yet again in a very positive direction on those fronts.
Last Friday, the Advocate and the Picayune, the newspapers of record in Louisiana, they have a headline: Board schedules clemency hearings, date set for 20 of the 56 death row inmates seeking life sentences. And last month you talked about your epiphany on this subject, if that's the right word, but you're waiting. What happens in the next few months? Can you foresee what may get to your desk and how you will respond?
I can't. So I know that they have set 20 for hearings, I think on 4 separate hearing dates. At this point, unless an application, a petition for clemency comes to me through the board that has recommended that the clemency be granted, which in this case is a change from being on death row to life without parole. So none of these people are petitioned, for example, to get out of prison. But unless one or more of these come to me with such a recommendation, there is nothing for me to do, and I just don't think it's advisable for me to try to comment on how many I will get and which ones they might be, and so forth. But I'm kind of like you at this point, in the wait and see mode.
Now, there's another story that is front page today. A woman serving life in prison after feeding cow's milk to an infant son who died malnourished in Shreveport, where the family evacuated from New Orleans for Hurricane Katrina, should go free, according to the State Pardon Board. That was a ruling on Monday. That's before you. I don't know if you've had a chance to review the case, but if you have, do you have any thoughts?
I don't. I have not had a chance to see it. So those, once the board acts and sends a recommendation to me, it is some time. It's a week or two at least before it comes to me, and then I have periodically I will schedule time to sit down and review those cases and make a decision. I read that this morning, is just like you did. That's the first I've heard of that particular case, and I will take a look at it. I do appreciate the very difficult nature of the job that these board members do, and so forth. And typically, whatever recommendation they make, especially if it's for clemency, it's supported by the warden and by an assessment of the likelihood of whether the individual continues to pose some threat to public safety, their entire record since they've been incarcerated in terms of what types of education programming they've taken advantage of, and so forth. And so they typically are very solid when they come to me, and I will take a look at it with that in mind, but I never make a decision before I actually have the file in my hands.
877-217-5757, your number for Ask the Governor. Let's go to James in Longview, who's our most loyal caller. James, good afternoon, sir.
Well, hi, Jim, and good afternoon, Governor Edwards. I was just wanting to know how you draft disaster declarations with regard to the legalese, so to speak. Does a specific person help in the wording style, the whereas and what fors, like in the current executive heat declaration?
Well, James, that actually is a good question. And unfortunately, we have a lot of experience in Louisiana with disaster declarations in particular. My executive counsel, Tina Venetia Gorn, works on that. She does that almost always in conjunction with Casey Tingle, who runs the Governor's Office of Homeland Security and Emergency Preparedness, and his staff. And this one is very important. We've actually had 16 deaths over the last 60 days, that are attributed to the heat. we've had not just extreme heat that's been prolonged, but a lack of rain. And so we've incorporated fire bans because wildfires are very difficult to control when everything is as dry as it is. But the other thing is firefighters. It is extremely hard for them to put on all their gear and fight a fire. They have to get pulled off the line frequently for IVs and so forth. So the burn ban is in effect. We have cattle that are having trouble eating because the grass is dry, and just there are lots of things going on in Mississippi River too. But my lawyer draws those up, and she does a wonderful job, James.
This is Jim Inkster, and we are pleased you are listening to Ask the Governor. And if you're so inclined, please give us a call at 877-217-5757. Robin Dow is producing, and Governor John Bell Edwards is in the house for the final half hour for show number 89. 4 shows to go after this. And a few months ago, the first few calls were about the weather, and the governor has responsibility over everything. And the weather, of course, is a factor in life and all facets of what we do, and the governor's been following this historic year, the hottest July in the history of the world, and August hasn't been much better. And I know that this has implications for the health and vitality of our state.
Commissioner Strain contacted me and let me know that farmers and ranchers were particularly challenged by the lack of rain in combination with the heat. And it's one of the reasons we had already started putting together the declaration, but we got it issued on Monday. But the Mississippi River is low because of the drought. And so we have salt water that is coming out of the Gulf up the river and is compromising municipal water supplies, for example, in Plaquemines Parish, in the lower part of Plaquemines Parish. There are so many different ways that this impacts our state. What we have to prepare for and pray that it doesn't happen is a hurricane. And that is because the hotter the Gulf water, the more energy that feeds into the storm, it can undergo rapid intensification. And so you don't really know that you have a nasty storm until it is at your doorstep, and it is extremely powerful. That is how the last several played out in 2020 and in 2021 with Laura and Ida in particular. And we know that the Gulf waters are probably hotter now than they've ever been. And there's been a lack of activity thus far. There are 2 systems that are out in the Atlantic right now that we are watching very closely. When this show is over, in fact, I'm going to GOSEP, not because, and we're going to have a unified command group meeting, not because we have reason to believe that these storms are going to hit us, but we want to be prepared because while hurricane season starts in the 1st of June. Traditionally, it is August and September when we have had the worst storms actually make landfall in Louisiana, and so we're gonna make sure that we're ready. But I'm asking the people in Louisiana to be ready. Go to getagameplan.org, and it can tell you everything you need to be considering, everything you need to do in advance to prepare. And then, of course, as I mentioned earlier, we can certainly pray that it doesn't happen.
Now, this was an international story. A group of young people in Montana this week won a lawsuit when a judge ruled that state's failure to consider climate change when approving fossil fuel projects was unconstitutional. It's early, but would that have some sweeping impact on a state like ours?
Well, it's my understanding that was an application of the Montana Constitution, and I'm not exactly sure what that specific language was, and I'm not sure that we have a provision that could be similarly construed. But having said that, I do believe climate change is real. I believe human behavior at least contributes to it. I think that we need to make sure that we're looking at what we're doing in terms of our CO2 emissions, and it's why we have our own climate action plan to reach net zero by 2050. It's why we're out there promoting the energy transition, and while the fossil fuel industry remains important, we do know that there's a transition to less carbon-intensive energy sources, particularly renewables. And I hope at the Public Service Commission today, that's some of what they were talking about. Wind and solar, but we're going to be mixing hydrogen in with natural gas to generate electricity. There's carbon capture and sequestration. There's biofuels. There's so many things, and we're getting record amounts of investment in Louisiana and
You
jobs.
had a big announcement a few days ago.
Direct air capture, and so the first two projects anywhere in the country were announced just last week. One in Southwest Louisiana, one in Texas, up to $1.2 billion total, and just hundreds of jobs, and has the potential to remove as much CO2 of the atmosphere out in terms of the Project Cypress in Louisiana as hundreds of thousands of automobiles. And so that's important, but other things as well. We announced First Solar. Altogether, all in $1.3 billion in a manufacturing facility in Iberia Parish to manufacture solar panels. That would never have happened in our country, much less in Louisiana, but for the Inflation Reduction Act that I think was a year old yesterday, if I'm not mistaken. But regardless, that is going to be huge for Southwest Louisiana, but we are getting record investments in large part because we are out embracing an all of the above approach and inviting people to come in and invest in Louisiana.
Karen in Baton Rouge. Karen, good afternoon. You're on Ask the Governor.
Good afternoon. Thank you. Governor, first, I want to just thank you for your support of science-based coastal restoration in Louisiana and your work on climate. I was very encouraged by the Mid-Barataria diversion groundbreaking as well as all the other types of projects we have in implementation. My question to you is, how do we most effectively get the next administration to show the same level of support?
Well, Karen, first of all, thank you. We have a real sense of urgency about the coast. Land loss here is real. 2,000 square miles since 1930. Football field every hour and a half. And so we know that we have to protect our population centers, our critical infrastructure, our industries, and so forth. And today, unlike a couple of generations ago, that is largely clustered in South Louisiana along the coast. And it's going to protect our way of life and so forth. So I have to believe that whoever the governor is, whatever the legislature looks like next term and beyond, coastal restoration and protection will remain a critical priority. I just keep reminding people you cannot invest what you do not have. And so if your goal is to get the revenue to the lowest possible levels, then you're not going to be investing very much. And you know, we went through that in the years before I was governor. For example, a third of every surplus we have proposed since I've been in office, and we've had a surplus every single year. We have proposed to go to the coast, in addition to the federal money that we spend, in addition to our normal capital outlay process. I think the way we keep momentum on the energy transition is to make it very clear to people, we've been an energy state for over 100 years. Mm-hmm. If we're going to be an energy state 30 years from now, it will be because we embraced the transition. We welcomed in the new technology. And by the way, the traditional oil and gas companies, they have their own goals for decarbonizing. They too are investing in renewable electricity. They're investing in carbon capture and sequestration and biofuels and so forth. And so if we don't do this now, we will miss out on the investment and the job creation. And regardless of someone's political views on climate change and so forth, everybody understands investment, economic development, and job creation. And when we're going to have a track record that will show anybody who pays attention and looks at it just how lucrative or how successful, I should say, our approach has been with respect to the investments. And so I think the next governor will. By the way, I know Sean won't. I don't think anybody out there will do an about face from what we've been trying to accomplish.
After you left West Point, you spent some quality time in Hawaii. That state's been in the news. Yeah,
and in fact, I was very fortunate that I was able to visit every island that wasn't privately owned. You know, there's some in the chain that you cannot visit. I certainly went to Maui more than once, and I was in Lahaina. The banyan tree there, I don't know if you've ever been there to see it, but absolutely spectacular. And of course, that's not the most tragic thing. It's the death count, which is now over 100, with still an awful lot of people unaccounted for. And that is just tragic beyond what words can describe and convey. My heart goes out to those folks, and it is just an awful situation. Again, drought conditions that much worse than Hawaii would normally have. I mean, Hawaii's right there on the ocean. There's a lot of rain, and some attribute that to climate change as well. But whatever it was, extremely tragic, and we've called over to our counterparts to make sure they know if they need help trying to plan for housing, because we've done a lot of emergency housing work, working with FEMA and so forth, or the General Waddell is called his counterpart, the Adjutant General of the Hawaii National Guard. But it's absolutely heartbreaking.
877-217-5757, and we will go to the phone lines in just a moment. But the governor, in addition to leading the state, is kind of the father counselor to a lot of people. And over the last month, since our last show, you had two people close to you, your priest, Father Beard, and Susan Nickel, the wife of Jim Nickel, our dear friend, former head of the Democratic Party and a prominent lobbyist. She died suddenly at 62 years old, and I know those were immense losses. We wish those families well, but they were personal losses to you.
Well, they were, and I was able to go to both funerals, and I can tell you the churches were full, and so Susan and Father Mark just obviously made a tremendous impact on so many people, and the services were beautiful, but obviously very sad as well. But my heart still goes out to Jim, and then to all the people in St. Helena Catholic Church there in Amite. Father Mark was my pastor. He had been since, I think, 2011 or 12 when he came to Amite, and someone that Donna and I knew really well, spent a lot of time with. He said the benediction at both of my inaugurations, for example. And he was just he was a wonderful pastor and a good person, and he will be very much missed. We're glad to have Father Miles Walsh there as the administrator at St. Helena Catholic Church in Amite until I don't know when the bishop will be able to name a permanent replacement.
You were, I would call it a devout Catholic. When you lose people close to you like this, in fact, you lost your mother.
Yeah.
Does your faith help you?
Oh, sure. So, for example, yesterday, August 15th, was my mother's birthday. It's also a holy day of obligation, always has been, for the Assumption. And I always knew on my mother's birthday,
You would go to church.
Before you called her to wish her a happy birthday, because she was going to ask you, have you been to church today? But yeah, the faith. So, for example, I am 100% confident that both Susan and Father Mark are in a much, much better place than we are now. It's still sad, it still hurts, but that faith, I think, does provide some comfort and peace. I just hope that the people who were closest to Susan and the Father Mark, the family members and so forth, can find comfort and peace as well. And I know that they're all faithful people too.
Brad in New Orleans. Good afternoon, Brad. You're on the air with Governor Edwards.
Hello, Governor. I want to know your opinion on agricultural marijuana, for industry more than but as well for recreational. All the other states are voting on this.
What about?
Well, I support it. I always have. I have supported hemp in particular. And when the effort started years ago, in fact, it was current Speaker Clay Sexsnyder who brought the bill. The thought process was that we could create an industry here in Louisiana by growing hemp and incorporating it into building materials and other things. And then it seems to kind of not have taken off to the degree that we had hoped, although farmers do have that option. And I know that there is probably a more robust effort in Northeast Louisiana, at least trying to get off the ground with respect to that. So I do support that industry. But the focus more recently has shifted to the CBD applications of that, which is an industry too, and it's related to hemp, but not what we originally had in mind.
What do you make of the fourth indictment of the former president who campaigned against you in 2019, but then won the state by 400,000 votes in 2020? He's very popular in Louisiana. I think still is with most voters, but he's in a lot of legal peril right now.
He is, and he won by 400,000 votes, despite the fact that we have Dominion voting machines here.
That is correct.
That kind of tells you a lot there. Look, I'm concerned. Obviously, those are just at this point allegations, and he's presumed innocent. He has a right to mount a defense, but I am obviously concerned because there were literally dozens of cases in federal court and state court all around the country, none of which found substantive fraud on a level that would have changed any outcome anywhere. And to have him and so many of his supporters continue to believe that there was fraud that changed the proper outcome of the election to allow President Biden to win. I don't even know how to wrap my mind around that. It makes absolutely no sense to me. And we're only going to be a constitutional democracy so long as we can have transitions. And so I think we have to figure this out and make sure that we are committed to democracy. And I would hope we've always risen to the challenge before as a country. I'm always an optimistic person. I think we will in this case as well.
Next year you'll be out of office, but you are certainly a ranking Democrat. Will you attend the Democratic convention, or is that in your rearview mirror?
Yeah, I hadn't even thought about it, to be very honest with you. I don't know. I wouldn't automatically be a delegate. I don't think. I'm not even sure what the. I
would think you would be a delegate if you wanted to be a delegate.
No, that's right. I just really haven't thought about it, Jim. That is a great question. I'm not even sure where the convention's going to be.
I know the Republicans are meeting in Milwaukee, and I'll find out in just a moment where the Democrats are meeting in 2024. I remember the Republicans met in New Orleans in the year of 1988 when George Bush was nominated. And Louisiana, believe it or not, used to be a swing state, but something happened. How do you explain the transformation we have? It's in Chicago, by the way, the Democratic convention.
Yeah. The Windy City's a nice place to visit too. I don't exactly know in terms of how that happened, but if you go back to 1964, Barry Goldwater won Louisiana, so it's not completely.
And George Wallace won in '68.
Yeah, so it's not completely out of character, right? And many people who at one time were Democrats were because it was the only party that you could belong to and get elected. And being a Democrat really didn't reveal much about your personal political philosophy, because we have conservative Democrats and moderate Democrats and liberal Democrats and so forth. But the discussions were still largely along the lines of what they are today in Louisiana. Mm-hmm. You just have those both parties now, and so So in one way, there's been a big transformation, but in another way, not so much.
Where are you on the spectrum? Conservative, moderate, or liberal Democrat?
I don't like the labels because I have positions. I'd rather tell you what my positions are. So for example, on the life issue, people would say that I'm very conservative, but it's my pro-life views that lead me to believe the Medicaid expansion is the right thing to do, and that's typically thought of as a
Liberal.
on the liberal end, but they come from the same place. And so I really don't like the labels so much. And I would have to say, if you just threw it all into the hopper and you had to come out with one, I'm somewhere in the middle of the political spectrum, which is why
center left.
Well, yeah, and I think otherwise, I don't think I could have won or have been reelected.
Not here, no.
Correct. So I think that's where I am, but I just don't like the labels because, we thought of, for example, Ronald Reagan as a conservative Republican. Well, you look at the Freedom Caucus in Washington, and they consider themselves to be the most conservative Republicans today, but there's not a whole lot in common between what they believed today and what Ronald Reagan espoused. And so I think the labels can be just very misleading.
We're coming down the stretch, but let's get in Marie in Iberia Parish, who's been waiting a little while. Marie, good afternoon to you.
Hi, I wanted to ask the governor, if you buy an electric vehicle, you have an additional $100 a year registration fee. And if we're trying to promote that in the state, why are we penalizing people who branch out into electric vehicles?
Well, thank you very much, Marie. I don't look at it as a penalty, but I'll tell you the thought process behind it is because we support our transportation system, both preservation and maintenance and new capacity projects through a gas tax. Electric vehicles are not going to be filling up with gas, and so you're not going to be supporting the roads that you're driving on. And so the thought process was we will have an additional amount that you will pay to register those vehicles, and that additional amount will support the State Transportation Trust Fund. But the $100 is not really a penalty because it's less than you'll pay in gas tax, much less on average in a given year than if you had a internal combustion engine powering your automobile.
Well, we've got to roll, and unfortunately, we won't be able to get to our final callers, but we'll be back next month, September 20th. The governor will have a birthday between now and then, and we wish you a happy 57th, and we hope that we won't be dealing with any hurricanes between now and then.
Amen. Thank you, Jim. And show 89 is in the can.
That's right. Thank you, Governor.